My name is Jessica Pate, and I'm a scientist at the Marine Megafauna Foundation, where our mission is to save ocean giants from extinction. So our focal species are manta rays and whale sharks, but we do a lot of work with other species now, like bull sharks and guitar fish and turtles and all kinds of things. So my presentation, you'll learn a little more about me in my presentation. But I'm going to start off by talking about manta ray biology and conservation overall, about my research in Florida, and then a little bit about what goes on in your neck of the woods in the US Virgin Islands. So first off, I feel like, is everyone here marine people? I don't know if this is all a marine crowd, but I feel like you guys should know this slide. I put this in the front of every presentation because I'll give a whole presentation and then people will tell me, oh my God, I saw a manta ray in the Cayman Islands and I was feeding them and they were crawling on my back. And I was like, no, you missed the whole presentation. So manta rays and stingrays are very different, though related, but they're adapted for different lifestyles. So stingrays spend all their time on the seafloor. Manta rays spend all their time in the water column. They have to keep swimming in order to breathe. So you'll never see a manta ray on the seafloor. You notice their body plans are different. Stingrays have eyes on the top of their head. Mantas have eyes on the side so they can see all the way around. And then obviously stingrays have stinging barbs. Manta rays do not have those. And one of the most noticeable things about manta rays is their large size. The biggest manta rays can get 7 to 8 meters across, which is over 20 feet. So they are super large. This diver here is about my size, like 5'8". And you can see like her arm is about the size of like a manta ray pelvic fin there. This is down in Ecuador where they get truly giant mantas. The other distinguishing feature of manta rays is their cephalic fins. So these are the little like horns that stick out of their head. Cephalic just means pertaining to the head. So they can roll them up when they're not using them, and they unroll them when it's time to feed. So manta rays are filter feeders. When they get into a big patch of soupy plankton, they'll unroll their cephalic fins and use them as a funnel to funnel all the yummy plankton-rich water into their mouths. And then in order to consume the plankton and to catch it, they have these structures in their gills called gill rakers. So these kind of catch all the plankton. So then the plankton are able to swallow and then the water flows out. So that's how a manta ray eats. And here's an example of what it looks like when a manta ray rolls up its cephalic fins. They'll just go and we see them do this a lot. We think it's been hypothesized that manta rays use their cephalic fins in communication, but there's still a lot to be learned about that. One of my favorite facts about manta rays is that they have large brains. In fact, they have the largest brains of any fish. So if we compare them to their cousin, the whale shark, who's about 10 times the size of a manta ray, they have a brain that's the third of a manta brain. So they're not quite as smart as our manta friends. But why do they have these big brains? Why do they put energy to having this? And similar to us and why we have big brains, we think it's likely because they're very social creatures. This is footage, unfortunately not taken by me, of a place in the Maldives where hundreds of mantas come together to feed cooperatively. So they basically make this, they call it cyclone feeding because they basically make like a tornado that makes a current of all the plankton and makes it easier for everyone to eat, which someday I hope to make it there and see it. Another way they are social is when they mate. So manta rays will form what is known as mating trains, which will be a female followed by 2 up to like 20 males. And so what happens is the female just goes around, she'll do a lot of evasive maneuvers. I think you're going to see her do like a little turn here soon. Yep, there she goes. And all the males follow her. And this can go on for hours and hours and hours until it's last man standing. We don't really know how the males are selected by the female for who's gets to mate, but yeah, but so there's a lot of social behavior here. And it's very, very rarely seen in manta rays because it happens so quickly. They'll spend hours in these mating trains, but mating takes about 30 seconds. And that's because manta rays are negatively buoyant. Once they start mating, they begin to sink to the bottom. So here's an example with spotted eagle rays that I filmed here in Florida. And the male is on top, the female is on bottom, and the male bites onto the female's pectoral fin and uses that to turn himself upside down. Right now, he's trying to position his claspers into her cloaca, and you'll see him start kind of flapping in a second. Right now, this is about when mating's starting. They're in very shallow water, so you see they sink, hit the bottom, and then they scatter. So it happens the same way in manta rays, but it's very rarely filmed. So manta rays have some of the most conservative life history strategies out of all sharks and rays. They have a late age of maturity. We think they're maturing around 8 to 10 years of age, maybe more. They have a full year of gestation before they give birth to a live young, and they give birth to one very large pup. And they take about 2 to 5 years between pregnancies because it's super energetically expensive, to put all their energy towards this one large baby. So this is what a little manta fetus looks like. This was from a stranded individual. And so they're in the uterus with their pectoral fins over their backs, and this is how they're born, because basically that's the only way that they can actually fit through the mom's cloaca. They wouldn't be able to fit if their wings were outstretched, so they kind of have to stretch them out once they're born. Can anyone guess how big a newborn manta ray is? Can anyone shout which one they think it is?
3 feet?
All right, I heard 3 feet.
A foot? 1 foot?
Foot. You're all too small, 6 feet.
Wow.
So when we say a big baby, a very big baby. And no one has seen manta rays born in the wild. It's never been observed. But there is an aquarium in Japan where they've had like 8 to 10 babies, and about 6 feet was the average size. And that was of the smaller species of manta as well. So they are truly very large babies. So we have 2 species of manta ray, the giant manta ray, which is the one I showed you, that really big in the first photo. These are thought to be more kind of like oceanic, kind of nomadic travelers. And the reef manta ray is slightly smaller, but still very large. And they're more coastal and reef associated. So in 2003, when my colleague, Andrea Marshall, she was asked to assess the manta rays. Back then, it was only one species. She was asked to assess them for the IUCN Red List. And back in 2003, she basically had to say they were data deficient. Like there was hardly anything known about them, and we couldn't say anything about their populations. After we collected, or more data was collected, a lot of it by MMF, they were both listed as vulnerable in 2011. And more recently, unfortunately, the giant manta ray was uplisted to endangered. Which means it's facing a very high risk of extinction in the wild. So what are their threats? They have a lot of threats. Entanglement, remember I said they have to keep swimming in order to breathe. So they can get entangled in like a mooring line, like you see in this photo, or gill nets are a big problem because their cephalic fins go right into the gill nets. And then when they get stuck in there, they're going to drown unless they're removed. We'll talk more about vessel strikes later. Climate change, we don't know a lot about how that's going to affect them, but I'm sure it will. And microplastics is an interesting one because these tiny plastics are the same size as the zooplankton that they're feeding on. So one of my colleagues in Indonesia found that manta rays there were consuming up to 60 pieces of plastic per hour. So we don't really know overall how this is affecting them, but you can imagine this might cause like intestinal blockages and leaching of toxins. So it's an emerging area that needs to be looked at more. But by and large, the biggest threat to manta rays worldwide are fisheries, both targeted catch and incidental catch as bycatch. What you're seeing here, it's a fishing market in Indonesia. Indonesia is now actually the whole country is a manta ray sanctuary. So these fishing markets don't exist anymore. But before they did, lots of mantas were killed. And the reason mantas are targeted is for trade in Asian markets for their gill plates. This is something that started coming about in the 90s, really. And their gill plates are sold as that's kind of like cure-all tonic. They sell it to like cure cancer or for breastfeeding moms. It's supposed to like filter bad stuff out of your body. So there's no scientific evidence that it does that, but that's the reason that there is a market for these. Because gill plates per kilogram are they go for more than like shark fins. But there's actually just a paper that came out just a couple weeks ago that actually shows that the manta meat trade is also a lot bigger than anyone thought, which is interesting. So they're at CITES as we speak right now, and hopefully they're talking about uplisting all the manta rays to help kind of control some of this trade. All right, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about Florida and how I got interested in manta rays. This is me. Every time I give this presentation, this picture gets further and further in the past. I think this is like 15 years ago now. When I was a baby biologist, just out of undergrad, I was working in Florida on the sea turtle nesting beaches. And so, we're out on the beach counting turtle tracks. There's so many turtles. We're out there all day. And sometimes I would look over in the water and I would see manta rays swimming by in super shallow water. And I was just fascinated because, I was a scuba diver and I was like, I've never heard of anyone talking about manta rays in Florida. And I used to put my fins and my mask on the back of my ATV and try to swim out to them, but I was never successful at doing it. So I was just kind of always keeping an eye on this. This is a Google Scholar search for manta ray Florida in 2010, back when I first saw my first manta rays. And this was the only thing known about manta rays in Florida. It's just a simple paper saying that 3 were seen in this lagoon in the 1990s. So luckily now that's changed with a lot of our work. And then if you went even farther back, some of the stuff you could find about manta rays in Florida would be these historical accounts of trophy hunting manta rays, which was kind of popular around the turn of the century. Does anyone know who this guy is?
Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah, Teddy Roosevelt. You can find this article online called Harpooning the Devilfish by Teddy Roosevelt. And this was taken this photo is taken off the Gulf Coast of Florida. So there's quite a few articles in the early 1900s that talk about them going out and basically they'd harpoon a ray and then basically just chase it around until it was tired for like hours and hours and hours and then bring them on board or to the beach. So yeah, so this was about the extent of the information I could find on Florida manta rays. So because there was so little information, I decided to start the Florida Manta Project. What I like to say, especially to younger people or students, is that I didn't go from seeing manta rays directly to starting the Manta Project. It makes it sound way too easy. There was probably 7 to 8 years between those two things occurring. I went to grad school here in Florida where I tried to convince my turtle advisor to let me study manta rays, but I ended up sitting up all night watching baby turtles swim around in circles in a little tank, which was not fun. And then I got a job on a sailboat, which I was actually based in the BVI's most of the time out of West End and Tortola. But we would sail around the Caribbean where I taught marine biology and scuba diving. And then I came back to Florida and was still working with turtles when I decided I'm going to just see if there's even enough mantas to study in Florida was my first question, because I honestly didn't know. And it turns out there were. So we have 2 projects in Florida. Our first project that we started in 2016 in South Florida. So this is kind of based right in Palm Beach County. And in 2021, we started a project in Central Florida. That's right off the coast of Cape Canaveral. So I'll talk to you about both of those, but we'll start out with South Florida. So what we do when we go out looking for manta rays, when we find one, we get in the water with them. We do all of this free diving. We don't do any scuba diving because it's really shallow and the mantas are kind of skittish and fast. And one thing we're trying to get, or one piece of data we're trying to collect, is a photo of their spot pattern. This way we can identify individuals based on this unique spot pattern, just like a fingerprint. We also look at sex. You guys are marine people, so maybe you know that sharks and rays, males have claspers, which are these 2 appendages here. And so based on the size of the claspers, you can tell if the animal is sexually mature or not. So this one at the bottom right in picture D, you can see the claspers extend well past the body margins. There's these clasper glands, which is indicative of a mature male. And then a juvenile is going to have these small claspers that don't go past the pelvic fins. And then B and C are kind of like subadult manta rays. So here's a video of what it looks like to get a manta ray ID shot. I get in the water. I'm swimming with a GoPro on an extended pole. We try to stay kind of to the side of the manta ray because they can see you better that way. And then we'll dive underneath. Bonus points if you guys can tell me if this ray is male or female. Anybody?
Female.
Female. Good job. Yeah, so that's what it looks like to go get an ID shot. What I like to mention is that was a day with perfect conditions, the clearest water, the friendliest manta ray. I have friends and my partner are underwater photographers who take all these gorgeous photos, which I show you in my presentations because they're nice to look at. But a lot of the times, this is what it looks like to study manta rays. They're not all friendly. A lot of them want nothing to do with us. And a lot of time they hang out in extremely murky water where we've actually had people kind of dive face first into them because the viz was so bad they couldn't see the manta ray before they touched it. So it's not all clear water, but that's what I'm going to show you because it's pretty. So in South Florida, we've identified over 200 individuals with over 1,000 manta encounters. And the reason the number of manta encounters is higher than the number of individuals is because we see the same individuals over and over and over again. And we have about a 52% resighting rate of individuals. And we have about a 1-to-1 sex ratio. So one of our big initial findings was that all the males we were seeing are sexually immature. So they all have these teeny tiny claspers. With females, it's harder to say for sure that they're sexually immature. Usually you need to look for visible pregnancies or mating scars from where the male bites onto the pectoral fin will leave scars. But we don't see that in these mantas, and their size is indicative that they're likely juveniles. So basically what we're seeing is a population of juveniles And we're seeing the same individuals over and over and over again, which means this is likely a nursery habitat here along the coastline of Southeast Florida. Unfortunately, the other thing about Southeast Florida is there's lots of people here. It's a very urbanized coastline. It's not like those mantas in the Maldives who are out in this like remote lagoon in the Indian Ocean. These mantas are next to like major urban centers. For example, this manta ray is right in front of Margaritaville, Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville in Fort Lauderdale. Is where this photo was taken. And so we see a lot of encounters with humans. About a quarter of our manta rays have fishing line entanglements. And many of these have had multiple incidences of fishing line entanglement. This can have varying effects on the manta ray. You can see here this manta has fishing line tightly wound around its pectoral fin. And when we saw this manta the next year, that fin had been completely truncated, the line cut completely through the fin. We try to remove fishing line whenever we can. We tried very hard to remove this fishing line from this manta, but it's hard when it's on their pectoral fins because they don't like you touching there. This is another example of a female manta ray who had fishing line wrapped around her cephalic fin, and we saw her the next year, and her cephalic fin was truncated. When we can, so how are these interactions happening? So we did a whole study of this, and it seems like based on our interviews with fishermen that most of these interactions are happening incidentally. They're not trying to hook manta rays. It's just happening accidentally. So if you look at this fishing rod right here, and the manta ray is here, you'll notice no one is monitoring this fishing rod. And you see that go turns or it hooks, and now the manta ray is hooked. And you see this guy fighting it, and then eventually the manta is going to break that line, which is right there. So we've been working, and what can happen, so this is pretty much what's always going to happen when they hook a manta ray. None of the people doing the shore-based fishing are fishing with tackle that's strong enough to like reel a manta in and remove the hook. Either the line's going to pop off or the line's going to break. And what can happen is manta rays like to do this behavior where it's called barrel roll feeding. They'll kind of do these flips. If they have a really long piece of fishing line attached to them, it just becomes wrapped around their body, which we've actually found a manta with an entire fishing pole attached to it. We kept pulling in line, and it eventually led to a pole because I guess someone wasn't monitoring their line, and the manta just pulled the whole rod over. Here's an example of us removing fishing line from a manta. This is actually one of the very first years of my project and one of the first times I was removing fishing line. But you can see here, this is one of our friendly mantas. She's actually hooked dorsally and ventrally. The reason it took me so long to cut it is because I was trying to cut through metal leader. But you can see this manta is kind of facilitating this interaction. She doesn't love me, but she sat below us for about an hour and made really small circles and made no attempt to like get away from us. So I was really excited the first time I cut fishing line off a manta. But so like you hear, these encounters that people talk about with like marine mammals, large whales, like they seem to kind of facilitate the like disentanglement process. And we definitely see that with mantas too. Maybe that has to do with their large brain. I don't really know. Some of them want nothing to do with us and we can't get the fishing line off, but when they help you do it. So we're working with fishermen or anglers to reduce these interactions. We have these signs at fishing piers.
For 27 minutes?
No, it's not. They would have notified. I think it's just the Wi-Fi cut out or.
One of our Wi-Fi's cut out. Uh-oh. I don't know if you can hear us,
Boat.
but we just lost it for a second.
Oh,
Okay, I think you're back. You're back.
back.
Yep.
All right. So another thing we see in Florida are encounters with boats. As of this year, I believe there's over 1 million registered vessels in Florida. So there's a lot of people on the water, a lot of people on the water who have no idea what they're doing. And we're seeing a lot of interactions with mantas and boats. I could probably play like 24 hours of footage like this of just like boats running over or by mantas. We see it so much. And we do see boat strikes on mantas. About 8% of our mantas have been hit by a boat. And those are just the ones that are surviving the encounters. Obviously, we're not seeing the ones who die. Seeing a dead manta ray is very rare because they sink and they're made of cartilage, so they decompose really rapidly. So this is kind of what a boat strike injury looks like. This manta is named Scarface for obvious reasons. So this yellow arrow down at the bottom is pointing to what's called the skeg of an engine, which is that leading line, which causes this kind of long mark here. And then the prop causes kind of chop marks that are perpendicular to that skeg line. And so that's how you tell what a boat injury looks like. Sorry, there's some gross photos coming up or sad photos. This is a manta named Gilly, who we used to see all the time back in 2017 and 2018. This was super fresh injury observed. You can see the deep cut by the skeg and then these marks by the prop. And if you actually look underneath, you can see another healed skeg and prop marks. So this wasn't the first time this manta has even been hit by a boat. But since we saw this manta a lot, we took this picture on August 15th and we saw him 4 days later. And this is what that injury looked like. So the big skeg mark had closed a lot and the prop scars had almost completely healed. And this was 4 weeks later, they're completely healed. So while this shows that manta rays have
Okay. Yeah.
Remarkable resilience.
I'm not sure.
I mean, I
You
just
can do it.
assume it is.
all right, I'm sorry, I didn't know if I froze.
Yeah, you froze for a second. Yeah.
Okay, you guys froze too, so I stopped talking. Are we good now?
Yes.
All right, I see you guys moving. So
Yes.
here's another really awful injury. This is one we saw in 2023. This was a very small juvenile that had been recently hit by a boat. And if you look right here, this manta had an acoustic tag, which didn't get cut off by the boat propeller, kind of amazingly. But this manta, this is what this manta looked like while it was swimming. You can see it can't really swim very well. And we left this manta. And when I finally got the acoustic data, it was pinging on our array for another 45 minutes after I took this video, and then we never heard from it again. So this is evidence of a likely mortality by this young ray, and we never saw him again. This is just really sad. And what I've learned from talking to wildlife people here is that in Florida, you're only allowed to make go slow zones for human safety or for manatees. So unless we're making voluntary ones, which I honestly think are kind of useless because
I'm actually not sure.
The-
Yeah. Sound like they had an array. Uh-oh.
Oh.
Drop. Oh, there you are. Oh, I think you're muted, maybe.
I can hear it. I'm there.
Oh, awesome. Thank
Sorry,
you.
that might have been my computer.
No worries. We have the same
Florida
problem.
internet can be equally bad. Yeah, so I was saying this is a juvenile male we tagged in 2019. We tagged it right here in Jupiter, Florida. The male kind of rode the Gulf Stream up, almost to the Florida-Georgia border, and then came down along shore, went down to Miami, and then kind of came back and hung out in the tagging area. And this all happened within like just over 2 months. So basically what we're seeing with a lot of our preliminary tagging data is that while mantas, even the juveniles, are capable of making long distance migrations, they're moving, up and down the entire coast of Florida, but they are showing preference to certain areas. So that's what we're really trying to suss out, is like, where exactly is this nursery habitat? What are the bounds of what are these mantas like using consistently? Because obviously protecting the whole coast of Florida is a difficult thing to propose. And I'm talking a little bit about our work in Central Florida. So this is an aggregation of adult manta rays that show up every spring. We're getting ready to go in like a month up there. So there can be hundreds of individuals. We've counted over 100 on a single aerial survey, and you can only see what's at the surface there because the viz, as you can see here, this is good viz for working up there. Usually it's barely see the hand in front of your face. So it makes it difficult to do a lot of work there. But what some of the stuff we found initially is that, one, we think this is a reproductive area. This is a male chasing a female. And I recently published a paper with all the reproductive activity we've seen there. So which is really interesting because, we have the babies down in South Florida, the adults kind of come in here in the spring, but where are they having these babies? We still don't know. That's one of the missing pieces of the puzzle. Though I'm like the first person to kind of study this aggregation, fishermen have known about it for a long time. And there's been this fishery around for decades where people go out and go find the mantas just in order to locate cobia. We did a study where we interviewed professional anglers and talked about how this fishery has changed a lot. And basically one of the big takeaways was, in the past 10 to 15 years, this fishery has changed a lot because it used to be very niche with this kind of core group of anglers who like word of mouth told each other about it. Then once people started posting online about it, now everyone, once the mantas come in, everyone knows about it. There's can be hundreds of boats out, and what you'll see a manta breach and just boats just go like zooming towards it. So the anglers talk about mantas looking like Christmas trees because they just have all these jigs and lures kind of up and down their fins from a lot of people who just don't know what they're doing. So we've been working with the professional anglers. We put out a video last year with some kind of famous anglers to show like, this is how you can do this responsibly, because responsibly fishing around them, you're more likely to be successful if you're not scaring the manta ray. But it's also interesting, the cobia fishery is also not doing well. And they talk about, they used to see like 20 cobia on one manta, and now you're lucky to find 1 cobia on a manta. We have a citizen science program. This is called mantamatcher.org, which is our global online database. So if you are anywhere in the world and you get one of those ventral photos of the spot pattern, you can upload it here and it'll go to whatever researcher in whatever part of the world. So this has been like a really helpful way that we've learned about like migrations, like some of the there's been papers published in Indonesia that's solely based on citizen science from this platform, showing that mantas make these movements and have been used to like make protection. So citizen science can be very important. And I wanted to share a little bit about what's going on in the US Virgin Islands. This is not my data. This is, I asked Nicole Pelletier, who's based in Bonaire and works with the Manta Trust. I asked her for her USVI data so you guys could see what's been seen here. So she has a database, and this is for manta rays and mobula rays, which are their smaller devil ray cousins. She's got over 1,000 records for all the Caribbean islands and 44 for the USVI, 6 in St. Thomas, 14 in St. John, and 24 in St. Croix. Where are you guys based?
We're based in St. Thomas.
Okay, St. Thomas, cool. And she shared some videos. Where is this video? Filmed in Magens Bay. Do you guys know where that is?
So cool.
Yeah, and here's another manta. This video is kind of long. Filmed in Cane Bay and St. Croix, which I've been diving there and it was awesome. But there's very little known about manta rays in the Caribbean. There's not really any spots where you like are guaranteed to find them. They're very like kind of one-off, just show up and, you know, are gone. So if you guys are out diving or paddleboarding or walking on the beach and you see a manta ray anywhere in the Caribbean, it'd be really, really great data to provide to Nicole and her team. Here's another one of some mobula rays, some devil rays. These are two, they're called pygmy devil rays, mobula hypostoma, that are, oh, this is St. Thomas, filmed in St. Thomas. So that's near you guys. And we're currently working on a paper about devil rays in the Western Atlantic and Caribbean. So if you guys have seen any of these rays, I'm working on publishing that paper now. And, you know, most of these submissions that she gets don't have an ID shot, you know, like they're a lot by like the paddleboarder or someone on the beach, or, you know, people just don't know. But they have it. She has identified 6 individuals in the US Virgin Islands so far. So this is it looks like a female that they first saw in June 2017 in Salt River Canyon, and then saw 4 times in 2018 in Cane Bay. So they are coming back and like using areas, but you know, it's just really slow data collection for her since it's just so opportunistic. So I don't know if you guys want to take a photo of this or screenshot it. This is if you wanted to report anything to the Caribbean Islands Manta Project. That's a run with the Manta Trust. You can also send anything to me and I'll just send stuff to Nicole. And a little bit of other stuff I'm doing is I told you I was already doing this kind of devil ray stuff, but I've also started a project on guitarfish in South Florida. We see these a lot on like the near shore hard bottom reefs. There's really hardly anything known about this species. So I was just curious if you guys ever see it there in the Virgin Islands. There's not a lot of data about its distribution in the Caribbean. But I'm always just asking. I know they go down to like Mexico, and I think they should be in the Caribbean, but I don't know that much about it. So if you guys ever see any of these species, let me know. And if you want to take a picture here, this is all of our MMF information. We have a really nice website about the Florida Manta Project. And then I usually post on my Instagram about like new things that are going on. These are all the people that give us money and all the volunteers that help us. And I have a nice little video to play while you guys ask questions of all the other fun stuff we see on our journeys, studies.
I have a question. So you mentioned that nobody had really observed manta rays giving birth. Is that, do you think because it's just like statistically, there's not that many mantas and it's hard to like just encounter one giving birth, or is it more like they go to deeper depths to give birth, or is there like a particular theory for that, do you think?
I mean, I would think it's because they're doing it somewhere that's not visible, because people do see pregnant manta rays, very pregnant manta rays. But they don't see them giving birth. So maybe they do it deep, maybe, yeah. I mean, I don't really know what they do. It's kind of the thing if I ever figure it out, I said, I'm just not going to tell anyone and retire. And it'll be my secret. But, yeah, I mean, people have seen them pregnant and then not pregnant, over, relatively short time periods, but so they know maybe it happens in this general area, but where, we don't know.
Thank you.
I don't really have a question, but I will say about 2 years ago, we did see a manta ray doing turtle tagging, like surveys just
Mm.
outside school. So we have a video of it, so I'll send that to you.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, if you can send it with like date, location, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, can you hear me?
Barely.
I speak really low, I'm sorry. You mentioned that manta rays are very social, but I noticed that like some of the videos, like there's usually like one. But then I'm also taking into consideration how you mentioned like that they migrate pretty far. So like, do they have like certain phases where they're like in, I don't know what they're called, clusters, and like certain times when they're like on their own?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Actually, I think I have a video right here. This is a cute video about with manta ray social behavior. This is two juvenile males who are kind of doing what I would consider courtship behavior, like chasing each other around, but they're both boys and not adults. But yeah, so typically, aside from when they're feeding, especially the juveniles, we're typically seeing like one manta, not necessarily mantas together. But they do come together, when there's a food source, and you'll see them following each other. These mantas are they're not feeding, they're just kind of hanging out. So there's a lot we don't know about their social behavior. I actually have a student who wants to work on that. There's a lot, I think, to be learned about it. And then for us with the adults, we just can't see anything that goes on in the water. So it's harder for us to observe that. But one of our researchers in Indonesia found that when you did like association analysis, he found that females tended to be seen together, female individuals tended to be seen together more often over long periods of time. So maybe they're forming these relationships, maybe they're just showing up to the same spots. There's a lot left to be learned about that.
Great talk. It's really interesting. Do you see the manta rays more often like in the open ocean or like right off the beaches, or do they ever come up into the intercoastal waterway? Where do they like to hang out near Florida?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things I say is that you're more likely to see a manta ray in Florida walking on the beach than you are scuba diving on the reef, which is one of the reasons why I think they went unstudied for so long, because, the reefs off where I am are very heavily scuba dive, and they very rarely see manta rays out there, which we don't have like cleaning stations like a lot of places do. And that's where a lot of like research and dive tourism takes place is on cleaning stations. You go to like a little korobwami and the mantas gather there, and that's where you kind of do your research and stuff. But here they're just kind of like spread out along the coastline. But we do aerial surveys, one that's right on the coast and one that's a mile offshore. And we see 95% of our manta rays on that coastal transect. So yes, they can be far offshore, especially the adults tend to do that. But what we see here is mostly them inshore. And yes, we have seen them in the intercoastal. I actually took that slide out today, but we've seen them up to like 6 miles away from the nearest ocean inlet. There's all these like canals in Miami and Fort Lauderdale, and it was during COVID lockdown. I think when everyone was stuck in their apartments, people actually started to look outside their windows, and we got all these reports of like manta rays back in these canals. So we don't still know that much about how they use the intercoastal, how often, but that's something that we're going to be studying more moving forward.
Very cool, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a comment like relating to what Jordan said. Probably been 20 years ago, I was sitting on the end of the dock and ready to hop in for a swim, and I had probably an 8-foot across manta ray go right under my feet. I jumped in to get a better look. He made like 3 passes, rubbing against my hand, which is really, really amazing. I was also going to ask about, you were saying that there was a lot more sightings during COVID. I would imagine the boat traffic was much less at that time also. No, it wasn't. People were getting out.
No,
Ah,
yeah. So in COVID, we saw more mantas in those canals specifically, not more mantas in general. But no, I think in Florida, there was just as many boats out, because one, people weren't working, and they closed the boat ramps. But if you had your boat in the water, which a lot of people in Florida do, a lot of people were out there.
okay, thanks.
No.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I have a
You go
question. Thanks, Jessica. That was an awesome talk. I was wondering, I have a couple of questions. One is mentioned that manta rays don't have the barb. So what like defense mechanisms do they have, and what predators do they have? And then also I was curious about the relationship with the cobia.
That's my question.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
That was Cole's question as well.
Yeah, so they actually have, well, one of the species has a remnant barb. So it's like a spine encased in this like calcified mass at the base of the tail. But so yeah, basically their defense is just being really freaking big. So like in Florida, we don't see a lot of shark bites. But like in Mozambique, where our MMF's research started, like 75% of those mantas have shark bites. They have a very healthy bull shark population over there. And so they kind of just sneak up behind the mantas and take little chunks out of them. And the mantas seem to do fine as long as it's not like getting into the body cavity. So yeah, so their predators are pretty much only large sharks, and orcas, because of course orcas are going to eat mantas. They eat everything. There was actually a recent paper about some orca predations in South Africa on big manta rays. And then the other question was, oh yeah, cobia. So yeah, I have a PhD student who's working on all the associated species we see with manta rays, but basically cobia, they just like to associate with something big. You also see them with like bull sharks and like leatherback sea turtles. So they just kind of are carrying along for protection with the manta rays.
Yeah, I have one more question. So you mentioned that you've done some tagging and you've collected some information from an acoustic array. Have you guys kind of set out your own array, or I don't know if this is exactly how it works, but can you use other arrays that exist in the area to collect your data?
Yes, absolutely. That's actually what I'm preparing data for is we have a meeting for the Florida Acoustic Telemetry Network. So basically we sign up to this network, and if my tags are detected on other receivers, I get notifications about it. And if animals, I send the same thing. I upload all my data to their data portal, and anything else that was detected on my receivers gets sent to the other researchers. So like on my receivers, we've got hammerheads and sawfish and all kinds of cool stuff. So yeah, I don't think studying manta rays with an acoustic array would be possible or even worth it without that. I'm honestly, like, I was looking at the data and I'm not sure if the acoustic array is the best way to study like larger movements of the manta rays, just because we don't have like a cleaning station that a lot of people can put on and see that the manta rays come back to that. Like they're going up the whole Florida coastline. But we have been really successful. We did a study about, there's one inlet that manta rays like to hang out at. And so doing like a fine scale analysis of like how they use that inlet worked quite well. So I think, at least for mantas here, you might need pretty specific about your question. And then for the larger movements, I just think satellite tags are probably better, even though we've been having a lot of problems with non-reports on our satellite tags.
What satellite tags are you using? And then I guess my reason for asking that question is like, are they surfacing enough to get data transmission, or are you using pop-up tags? And also, like, what kind of tag retention are you getting on them? Like, how long are the deployments?
Yeah, so we use both, mostly mini pat, so archival tags, but we have also used spot tags with pretty much not very good luck with the spot tags. The problem with them is we're doing all of these, external attachment into the dorsal musculature. And so for it to reach the surface, you need to have a pretty long tether. But the longer your tether is, I feel like the more likely it is to come off, because, manta rays, they breach, and, sharks follow them and bite it off. So we have a lot of trouble with tag retention on the spots. But we just actually had one work pretty well this year. So we keep on they keep refunding us the spot tags, and we keep putting it out, and I'm keeping like, it's not worth putting it out, but we keep getting one back. So we have been using them, but with very limited success. And then retention time, we program our tags to stay on for 6 months. They often come off before that, but I've had them stay on longer than that. One of the times the pin didn't burn, and I found the manta 8 months after we'd put it on, and physically pulled the tag off, and that tag had no data on it. So frustrating. It said there were 700,000 things, but then it was like 4 kilobytes. So we've been having a lot of problems with tag technology. But yeah, something to consider. I don't know if you guys are tagging there, but like we have really awful tag fouling here in the Western Atlantic. I mean, I have pictures somewhere, but like, in just like a month or two, these things can be covered in barnacles. So we have to be really careful about using biofouling or anti-foul on the tags.
Thank you.
Questions? I guess okay, I have one last question. I just keep coming up with more. Have you in your telemetry detections, which I know haven't been the best, but in your telemetry detections, have you ever found a manta ray ping or show up in a place that you kind of didn't expect it to? Like it showed up, it was detected very far away from where you thought it might be, or it had like migrated at you know, an unexpected distance or something?
So it wasn't necessarily unexpected, but so with the ones we put on the adults off Cape Canaveral, we've had one or two go up off the Carolinas, which I've always suspected they do because mantas are seen like all the way up to New York. But every satellite tag I put on a manta, an adult manta would just hang out off Cape Canaveral for the whole tag deployment. And we actually finally just tracked a manta all the way up the coast, of North Carolina with the satellite tag. But we have had a couple of acoustic detections up there as well. But other than that, not really anything super unexpected. We actually, this was through photo ID, not through telemetry, but just this year, we made our first photo ID between Florida and the Bahamas. So I always thought the mantas might go because I see the same kind of like baby mantas in shallow water in the Bahamas. But that was our first record of one actually doing it.
Cool, thank you.
Mhm.
I think that's all we got. Well, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. It was really awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for all the good questions and send me your manta reports. Does
Yeah.
no one see guitar fish?
Unfortunately not. We would absolutely love to see them, and maybe they're rare, but here, we're not sure, but, you know, I think.
I went down in St. Luke, further south, I've seen, electric eels, and other things similar, but not here.
Yeah, so
Hmm.
maybe not. We'll keep an eye
Okay,
on the space.
keep your eyes peeled.
All right, thank you very much.